Hello and welcome to this DW News live stream on the Iran war as the conflict continues to spread. I'm Alex Forrest-Whiting.
And I'm Venus Javed.
So it's day 3 since the US and Israel attacked Iran. Donald Trump has urged Iranians to yet again rise up against the clerical regime. And he's also said the war could last 4 to 6 weeks.
Iranian forces have retaliated across the region, including hitting many Gulf neighbors. Ships have also been hit in the Strait of Hormuz, and a Saudi oil refinery has been targeted. That's sparking concerns for the global oil supply and the economy.
We're going to have guests joining us from across the region, and we also have our Middle East analyst, Shani Rozanis, who is with us here in the studio. Thanks very much for being here. I know you've had a very busy few days, so it's great that you are still here.
I'm not going anywhere anytime soon.
You can't go anywhere. I guess you certainly can't at the moment. Let's just try to understand the US-Israeli strategy, because they started with a very powerful strike of fire. It was very carefully planned and seemingly also a success. But what happens next? I mean, who or what is still a target, given the fact that they seem to have taken out a lot of the leadership of Iran?
Yeah, we still don't know exactly who's not there other than Khamenei, but Israel and the U.S. do claim a lot of the leadership, political and military, is out. So that's, in that aspect, you're right. And the strategy was first to hit the military and defense targets. So a lot of the launchers, the past stocks of missiles, and of course that will allow the Israelis, the Americans, to deepen their attack. That clears the way for them, and a lot of their air defense and air systems to make them as vulnerable as possible. These seems to have been mostly achieved so far, and we have seen already yesterday the shift going more into targets that are trying to weaken the regime. We have seen the central commander inside Tehran, the city itself. We are seeing the interior minister. We are seeing more and more attacks into civilian populations, where you also have Besiege, which is the internal security service, securing and protecting the regime. A big part of the crackdown we've been seeing in January. So this is where the shift is going. We have heard Donald Trump being very, very happy with how things have been going so far, saying they're ahead of time. But at the same time, we have also heard him say it could take a few weeks.
Yeah.
So these, this mixed signals are, just to tell us we're still in the thick of it, and there's still so much up in the air. And I think it's important for both sides. We're also seeing a very defiant Iranian response.
Yes.
I think it took them a day or two to figure out their strategy, but they're being far better in timing their barrages and trying to get it more organized and bigger. It's a game of numbers for the Iranian eventually, because the Israeli defense, air defense, is very tight. So the more you attack Israel, the more missiles you manage to launch at once, the harder it is for Israel to defend itself. And we also want more war on that. Of course, Israel is not the only target. We've been seeing Iranians hitting all over in the Gulf and in the Middle East.
Yes, and we will certainly be talking about that as this stream goes on.
Alex, just want to speak to our viewers. You can also send in us questions on our YouTube live format, and you can already send us questions. We have Shani with us, and we also have other guests, an energy policy expert, and also our correspondents who will be joining us from Dubai and also Jerusalem.
Yes, very important point. Yeah, do please join us and pop in your questions, because we do have some excellent guests coming up. Just sticking then with the US-Israeli strategy, do you think that they are fully aligned in their goals of what they want to achieve from this? I mean, you talked there about Donald Trump saying it could take weeks. Where does Israel sit on this? Are they prepared for weeks, months, longer?
Let's be honest. I mean, if we need to think at the motor, the ideological motor behind this attack, it's probably Netanyahu. It sits in Jerusalem. This has been, Iran, the Iranian regime, has been a main pillar of Netanyahu's defense strategy since decades. So we know where the ideas come from. We know who is the motor pushing for that. But who's going to call the shots? That Trump. Eventually, that's going to be the Americans. It's going to be very hard for Israel to keep on pushing when the Americans say no. And Trump will look eventually for a strategy out, for a way, out of this conflict. I think for now, both sides are trying to posture themselves as like, we have all the time in the world. We're ready to make, if this needs to be a war of attrition or whatever it is, we're good. Saving face, sort of like trying to see how serious is the other side. But it's very clear that playing for time is playing much better in the hands of Iran than Israel and the U.S. when it comes to oil prices, when it comes to the economy, when it comes to the alliances that the Americans have in the region and how this directly affects them. Everybody there would like to see it come to an end sooner rather than later. This could be the advantage of the Iranians trying to stall and to prolong this as much as possible.
Just come in here because we have got some news that is coming in from AFP, which is a news agency, saying that there are a series of blasts that have been heard over Jerusalem. So I guess that again just stresses the fact that this is a war. It is ongoing. The conflict certainly is not going to be ending anytime soon.
And this is part of the Iranians. They want to exhaust the Israeli population. They want everybody on high alert. They want their lives to be disrupted as much as possible. This is part of the strategy. And again, when we're talking about the number, the power of the numbers when it comes to launching, the more you launch, the bigger is the chance that you might hit. And they have also had quite two major successes with direct hits in Israel, which has managed to penetrate the Israeli very thick defense system, air defense system. So they want to keep on doing that.
And maybe here we can bring this map and show to our audiences, if we can see that map. Can we see it?
Yes, hopefully they'll bring up, we have a map where we can just show where some of those attacks have been.
And all that we see in red are the US and Israeli attacks inside Iran. And you can see that there's a lot of concentration in Tehran. Shani, we know that in Tehran, Islamic Revolutionary Guard headquarters has been targeted. There was a strike definitely on Khamenei's compound and also home of the former president, Ahmadinejad. And we can also see a lot of attacks in western Iran. There are attacks in Shiraz, in the city of Karamcha, in Chabahar, Urmia, Tabriz. And all of what we see in yellow are the Iranian attacks, and they are all over in the Gulf countries, Kuwait, UAE, Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, also in Israel, in Jordan, and in Cyprus as well.
Oh, yes, Cyprus, where, of course, there is a British base there. Yeah. So that's obviously significant. But just sticking there with particularly these Gulf states and the fact that this has been escalating. What is the reaction there from the fact that they are now being drawn in? We mentioned their...
we just had a statement. A joint statement by Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Jordan, Kuwait, the UAE with the US. And that joint statement that recently released condemns what they call the indiscriminate and reckless Iranian attack. They were saying very much how they were mostly appalled by the targeting of civilian infrastructure. We know we've seen that in airports, in hotels, and so on. And of course, this is an infringement of their territory and sovereignty, and they saved themselves the right for self-defense. We have actually also heard a far more militant voice from the Qataris, from the spokesperson of the foreign ministry in Qatar, saying Iran needs to pay a price for its belligerent attacks. And what we are seeing here, that the Iranians have actually, they had two choices. They could have decided that they limit their response only to American bases, but what they have said already from the start is that any attack, and by letting, the way they see the Gulf countries is that when they allow U.S. bases to operate from their territory, they are already, complicit in the U.S. war, and therefore they feel free to target them. But at the same time, they are losing points here because they have also had some allies in the region, Qatar, one of them, and now being targeted and being very much upset by that. So this is a double-edged sword in a way. It could backfire on Iran.
But Shani, do you think there can be a scenario where these Gulf countries can all get together and start fighting against Iran?
We don't know. They've all said they save themselves the right to respond. If they're going to respond, we will still need to see where the Saudis stand after we have heard this morning that Aramco, that the oil refineries have been shut down due to a drone attack. We need to remember that in the past, when there was an attack on Aramco, this was 2019, that was by an Iranian militia, the Houthis in Yemen. They had actually not retaliated, and it also made them retreat from their attack on Yemen back then. So I think this is a different case. And in general, the Saudis and MBS, they're very enigmatic in this. We're hearing many conflicting reports. On the one hand, we've been hearing reports that he secretly actually did support this attack and wanted to do that because, I mean, what would he have to gain is positioning himself as the leader of the Sunni Arab world, getting rid of the Iranian threat, which, despite the warming up of relations in the last couple of years, it's a long... it's a rivalry that goes long way back. So that's one thing. On the other hand, they also don't want to see this region going out of flame. They also don't want to see Israel becoming a mega power with a complete blank check from the U.S. to operate however and whenever they want. So they're a bit more conflicted, and this is just one of the many different countries you see in the Gulf. We always tend to talk about the Gulf, but there's actually, if you look at the UAE, which has been a target for most of the attacks, that's not by chance. UAE is considered to be the closest ally of Israel in the region.
Yes.
So this is just to say, another thing that the Iranians are trying to gain by bringing the Gulf countries there is getting more pressure on Trump.
Yes.
Basically trying to get, hopefully they thought, the alliance between the Saudis and the Qataris and Trump into an indirect pressure on Washington to wind down attacks.
And is that working?
Doesn't seem like it. I think, but what we're seeing is that all cards are up in the air. And now everybody's also in a bind when he talks to the Arab world, when we talk about, because they're torn. Nobody was a big fan on Iran. They were definitely not big fans of Khamenei. But then at the same time, again, they're very much concerned with the fact that the Israelis and the Americans basically just step in and do whatever they want. A blunt attack on the sovereignty of another state. This is a precedent that could be troubling. And nobody wants to see Israel gaining too much power as well. I think for now, as we're saying, we're in the thick of it. It's still hard to see where we're going. We will have to very closely examine the next hours, see if the Saudis are willing to respond. Are we seeing from the Qataris more than just very militant tones? And that will tell us the indication of where we might be heading in the next days.
We have a question. Yep. We have a question from @Samson U5I. When will this operation end?
Oh, that's a great question.
Yes. You need to look into your crystal ball now.
Exactly. I can say this. I assess that these 4 weeks or 5 weeks that Trump was naming, that seems to be somewhat of an optimistic or pessimistic. I mean, it's an exaggeration. I think it's going to be very hard to keep that pace for that long. I think also the effect for the economy, not to mention the backlash within the U.S. For Trump, and with the very little support there is, the very limited support there is to this operation, I don't think it's sustainable for that long. But anything between now and 4 weeks is still a long stretch of time. Yeah. Hard to predict.
Shani, thank you so much so far. You're obviously with us throughout this stream. Just a reminder, if you are just joining us, it is day 3 since the US and Israel attacked Iran. Donald Trump has been urging Iranians to rise up against the clerical regime, and he has also said that the war could last 4 to 6 weeks. Iranian forces have been retaliating across the region, including hitting many Gulf neighbours, as we've just been hearing. And we do have just an update on what was happening in Cyprus. Sirens, according to Cyprus State TV, are going off at RAF Akrotiri, which is the British base in Cyprus, and as aircraft take off from that base. So we will, of course, make sure that we bring you up to date as we are getting news in as it happens. But let's now talk to our expert on Iran, and that is Teresa Tropper. She can join us now on the line with us. She is an analyst and also, obviously, with Deutsche Welle, with DW News. We know that Iran has been firing these missiles at US bases across the Gulf, and now it looks like in Cyprus too, where this British base is. Is this their full response, would you say, or is this just the opening, also bearing in mind what we've been hearing about that oil refinery in Saudi Arabia?
I mean, we are certainly hearing a number of massive threats coming from Tehran, basically all over the past few days. Ali Larijani, that's one of the country's remaining top security officials, one that's still alive, said, "We will hit them with a force that they have never experienced before." And in a way, of course, the killing of Ali Khamenei, so the supreme leader, has kind of crossed Iran's ultimate red line. So for the regime, there's no much point in holding back anything anymore. And this wave of drones and missile attacks, specifically against its Arab neighbors in the Gulf, is unprecedented for sure, and definitely a step up in its retaliation compared to what we saw last year. It's much more decisive, but the big question is, how long can they keep that up for? I mean, we've already heard, like, Israel and the US targeted Iran's missile launchers, its drone launchers in the beginning of this war, to kind of keep them from attacking at the scale they used to. And also Iran's supply of missiles and drones is not endless, because unlike the US or Israel, it doesn't really have allies that are willing to step in and provide them with something. I mean, Russia and Iran used to be considered Iran's closest allies, and they have for sure condemned the war, but apart from that, they have not done that much more. So Iran's supply is not endless. And on the other hand, we're seeing some people apparently reaching out to Washington to find out whether or not there's potential for more talks. We're hearing that even Ali Larijani himself might have tried to find that out. He himself, of course, denies it. But we certainly know that Abbas Araghchi, Iran's foreign minister, spoke to his Omani counterpart and saying that Iran would be willing to engage in whatever diplomacy needed to end this war. So there's certainly a lot of mixed messaging here.
Yeah, and just with the Ayatollah himself dead, Khamenei, and much of the top brass, as far as we know, has also been killed. Can you shed light on who is actually in control in Tehran?
Yeah, according to Iran's constitution, a provisional council has taken over to bridge the gap until a new supreme leader is found. That consists of the president, the chief of the judiciary, and a member of the Guardian Council. But that, of course, is the theory, because, of course, the command chain and the communication within the Islamic Republic is now severely disrupted with the killing of Ali Khamenei. And we have to keep in mind that Iran's security apparatus does not only consist of the regular army, like in most other countries in the world. There's also the Revolutionary Guards. That's a separate unit, actually the more powerful unit that was designed back after the revolution to protect the Islamic Republic against threats from the outside, but also from within. And they're spread out all across Iran, so they can keep a tight grip on the power. And they're only answering to the supreme leader directly. And from what we're hearing, this chain of command has been severely disrupted. Again, Iran's foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, said that some of the military units have become independent and somewhat isolated. I'm quoting him here, and that they're operating on orders only that have been issued before the war even started. And he said that what happened in Oman was not our choice. We have already told our armed forces to be careful about their targets they choose. So that definitely shows that the Iranian retaliation is not as coordinated as they would probably wish it was.
And would you say then that there is a power vacuum then at the centre, given the fact that at the moment we do not have a new supreme leader?
Well, absolutely. And of course, many people are hoping that that's something the opposition can make use of. I mean, it's certainly what Trump and Netanyahu have called Iranians to do. But I think that for now, the moment is not here yet. I mean, the war is still going on. And right after the first attacks happened, there was an address to Iranians by Reza Pahlavi. That's the son of Iran's last Shah. He lives in exile in the US and has kind of been acting like an opposition leader increasingly lately. And he basically called on Iranians to stay inside and take shelter so they're not killed or hurt by these attacks, and then wait for him to give them a sign when he wants them to go back to the streets and basically finish the job that the US and Israel have started now. And judging from what we've seen in January, when he called for Iranians to take to the streets and protest against the regime, which they then did, like in thousands and thousands across the country, people inside Iran are actually listening to him. The problem, however, is that right at the moment, we really don't know whether people are actually able to hear what he's saying or what anyone is saying to that regard, because internet traffic is like seriously disrupted. We're almost seeing like zero traffic at the moment, so we don't really know how much Iranians are able to communicate right now. It's kind of hard to assess whether that was done by the Israelis or the Americans to hamper the Iranian response, or whether that's being done by the Islamic Republic itself to quell any sort of protests before they even start. But at some point, we'll have to see whether he makes that call and if Iranians respond to it.
Yes.
Teresa, we have a question. Can we expect more demonstrations like the one at the U.S. consulate in Pakistan? So there were protests in Pakistan, but within Iran, we have also seen that there have been protests in favor of the Iranian regime. So would we be seeing more of those kind of demonstrations in Iran?
Yeah, that's obviously the kind of demonstrations that are easily to be had inside Iran, protests in favor of the Islamic regime, because those are the ones that are actually allowed to happen. Those are the ones that are actually happening, and some people say they're even like encouraged or staged to be happening. So that's perfectly possible. We could see those across Iran, of course. It's the other side that is kind of hampered in expressing their free opinion. So we're seeing the protests pro-regime, and the other ones are kind of happening stealthily at night, where people are shouting from their homes or dancing in the street. So that's just the reality in Iran. As long as the Islamic Republic is still in power, that there are these two sides, and just one of them can kind of do it in the open, and the other one has to take care.
But despite the fact that their Iranian regime has been bombed, so many high officials have been killed, still people are. What do you mean? There's still a lot of tight grip of the Iran Revolutionary Guard or the military on the streets that's not allowing people to come on the street and protest?
Yeah, well, we would have to find that out if they actually try to do so. I think for now, people are just staying inside. That was basically the same thing a year ago when the US and Israel had already attacked during the 12-day war. People were also calling on them, like from the outside, to take to the streets, which they didn't do because, of course, it's super scary to take to the streets while like bombs are raining down and you're afraid to get hit. And that's no different at the moment. So I think for any protests to happen, the attacks would have to stop at least for a time. And then we would see whether or not the regime has anything left in its tank to suppress these protests. But judging from what we see in the past, suppressing protests from within and defending the regime against attacks from within was always what the Islamic Republic did better in comparison to defending itself against attacks from the outside.
Let me just bring in a couple of new lines that are coming in as we speak. We have from AFP, the news agency, saying that Iran says that it has targeted Israel's Prime Minister Netanyahu's office. That's from an Air Force commander headquarter. And we are also hearing from Oman that an oil tanker has been attacked in the Gulf of Oman by a bomb-carrying drone boat, sparking a fire and killing one person. And of course, we will bring you more news as we get it coming in whenever it does. Shani, did you want to respond to some of what Teresa was just saying there about what is going on within Iran?
Yeah, first, I just want to say about the attack on the Israeli Prime Minister, I don't see any Israeli response for that yet. I will keep you posted once I do hear. No, I think you were talking about the protests. We need to keep in mind that as much as this was a very oppressive regime, a very unpopular regime, there's still, Iran is a nation of 90 million people. There's still a good, solid few thousands, that are supporters. There were supporters and admirers of the leader, of Khamenei. They are devastated, not only in Iran, also in Iraq and other Shia centers. So that's for itself is still there. And we talk about the system. We talk about, Teresa was talking about this is a regime that was, it was fortifying its own existence. You know, the goal was always, like, the Revolutionary Guards are the main part of that, but the goal is not to support or defend Iran, you know. Iran has been talking about the big and the small devil, Israel and the States, for 47 years. Not a single shelter has been built. It's not like they were actually practically preparing for an attack or for a war. You know, the idea is to fortify the regime, because it's a system. It's a religious system. It's an ideological framework that is very important for them to maintain. And also, when you look at what we were hearing about the reports of what's still on the ground, we're talking about the besieged, the IRGC. We're talking about several good hundreds of thousands of people operating, benefiting from this system, you know, being part of it. So toppling the regime, changing what's on the ground. We're talking about the vacuum left behind. Iran is surprisingly, you know, a very well-organized, hierarchical country where you have different institutions. Many are connected directly to the supreme leader, but not all of them. So expecting it to crumble or to implode from within so fast, I think that's not realistic. We need to understand the kind of, the kind of expertise and that the Iranians have built throughout the years exactly for this scenario.
But was the U.S. president thinking about that? Because he has asked people in his first address that once we are done, you come out on the streets and topple the government. That window is still there.
Well, we need to keep in mind he said it again last night, didn't he? And we can actually probably play a clip from Donald Trump, hopefully in a moment, just as they get that ready. But continue.
Well, basically...
I think we can just now hear that. Let's just hear what he said. Oh, we maybe can't hear that at the moment. Here we are.
Revolutionary Guard, the Iranian military, police, to lay down your arms and receive full immunity or face certain death. It will be certain death. Won't be pretty. I call upon all Iranian patriots who yearn for freedom to seize this moment, to be brave, be bold, be heroic, and take back your country. America is with you. I made a promise to you, and I fulfilled that promise. The rest will be up to you, but we'll be there to help.
Well, basically what he is not saying, but he's insinuating, is that boots on the ground will be Iranian boots, Iranian civilians that will need to finish this attack.
Which is a big ask.
This is a big ask, and of course, technically, there's a lot that, you know, that it requires, but we also have to be very honest about, we don't really know about some of the covert operations that are going in here with CIA and Mossad. You know, we both Israel and the US have shown us in the last attack that the transparency, you know, the penetration into Iranian systems is quite big. So we are getting hints that there's more back channels and more things that are happening we're not fully aware of. We'll have to see if they're going to be ignited, how successful and how powerful they really are. But I think it's also, again, Trump has said, I'm giving you what and no other president has ever given. You know, it's part of his need for self-aggrandizing, but it's also true in the sense that partially why we're seeing this attack as it is today, in this time, is that the regime has never been so clearly weak as we've seen it in the last months, and definitely after the wave of protests that we've seen in January.
Thank you. Teresa Tropper, if you are still with us, Great. I just want to check with Kevin, who is our is pulling some of the strings here, whether we do have our a journalist who can speak to us from Dubai. So I just, Kevin, if you could tell me. So we don't yet have our, we were hoping to speak to some of our journalists and some of our correspondents in the region, but because there is obviously conflict going on, many of them have had to take shelter and they are unable to join us at the moment. So let's press on with this, Teresa, and let me ask you something a little bit different about what we were just mentioning there within Iran itself. The Strait of Hormuz, which Iran is said to have closed. I think we can bring up a map, hopefully, where we can show where it is. It's an extremely important area and passage for Iran and for other countries in the region. Iran is said to have closed it. This is a big decision for them. Why have they taken this decision, and is it their biggest card that they have to play?
Well, yeah, it's certainly one of Iran's biggest cards to play, because about 20% of global oil exports normally pass through this narrow strait. And Iran has been teasing to play this card for a long time, both with words and with actions, by threatening to attack ships in the Strait of Hormuz or by attacking ships in the Strait of Hormuz. And a closure, of course, would have like an immediate effect on global energy markets and prices across the world. And we've already seen the beginning of that with some companies suspending their trading routes there. But whether or not that they're really completely going to close it, that's somewhat uncertain to me, because they've been teasing that for years, if not decades, and then never really pulled it off, because it would not only hurt like global trade, the international community and the West, which they're of course like trying to hurt, but it would also hurt Iran itself, and potentially even more important, one of its closest ally, China, because Iran is one of the biggest exporters of oil, but most of that oil actually goes to China, because the countries in the West are not buying anymore. So if Iran really completely closes the Strait of Hormuz, these oil exports to China would likely also be cut off. So I suspect that Beijing would also get a say in this kind of decision there.
And Binish, you can talk a little bit more about what we are seeing.
So we are seeing this narrow part that we are seeing on the top. That is basically the mostly considered as a choke point. And here, Iran and the Iranian proxy Houthi have a lot of influence, and all the red ships that the red signs that we are seeing are all the parked ships, and we are basically all of this part, where Iran and Houthis have influence, it's completely empty. Because Iranian Revolutionary Guard Navy, they have warned the ships not to come. There have also been reports of attacks on the ships, and therefore nobody is taking the risk. And right now, this is like a live tracking of the Strait of Hormuz, and we see it's completely empty.
And we have heard, haven't we, that insurance companies have said that they are not prepared now to insure tankers that are using that strait because of this conflict, which is, of course, going to cause big problems within the global supply chain. And we will shortly be speaking to an economist who specialises in energy economics, where we can pick up on that a bit more. But Teresa, just looking at that, you mentioned there China, and you said that it will hurt China, which of course is a risk to Iran, because Iran needs China to buy its oil.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it needs to export its oil as long as, at least as it still can. I mean, obviously, oil facilities inside Iran are also a potential target for US and Israeli attacks. So, but while they still have oil, I mean, that's also one of their main sources of income for the Islamic Republic. And they've, obviously are in need of a lot of money to keep producing missiles and drones and to pay for all the people there that are supposed to fight against these Israeli and the US attacks. So Iran very much depends on the income they have from that oil. Definitely in its interest, and also potentially in China's interest, to keep that export of oil going.
So one final question then, Teresa, because I hope that we can go to Dubai fairly shortly, but just a quick question. We've talked about all of this. We've talked about what's happening there in the Strait of Hormuz, and we're talking about this big leadership vacuum in the centre of Iran while this conflict, this war is continuing and doesn't look like it's going to die down anytime soon. Do you think we can say that the regime is on the verge of collapse, or would you say actually they have proved to be more resilient than many people had thought?
Yeah, well, that's the big question here. Of course, everyone is asking that. But I would say for now they are still standing, at least partly. But for sure, the Islamic Republic is at its most vulnerable ever since it was established back in 1979, I would say. And not only from the outside with these attacks by Israel and by the United States still going on, but also from the inside. Because remember, just like a couple of weeks ago, we saw that huge protest movement with people inside Iran taking to the streets in thousands and thousands across all of the country, demanding an end to this theocratic regime. People were no longer calling for some sort of change, which they did in the past. Now it was about regime change. It was about death to Khamenei, death to the regime. They raised the lion and sun flag across Iran, which was used before the revolution. They shouted Javid Shah, like long live the Shah. So Iranians are also enemies of this regime. So the Islamic Republic is facing its enemies from the outside and potentially enemies from the inside fairly soon. And Iranians, those at least who are against this regime, which is the vast majority as far as we know, they always knew that they would depend on some sort of outside help to topple this regime, because they saw back in January that the Islamic Republic is both willing and able to kill thousands and thousands of people if it needs to stay in power. So while many are scared at the moment of this war, they are also aware that they might have to take a risk to achieve their goals. So it will be very interesting to see whether or not we reach a point where Iranians are taking to the streets again.
Teresa Tropper, thank you so much for joining us. That's our Iran analyst. We appreciate it very much. I think we've got some more comments possibly from our chat. Maybe we could just briefly hear them, because I do want to go to Dubai next to speak to a DW journalist there, Emily Gordine, before she has to depart because there's another bomb alert or a siren.
So I think it's a bit related to Emily, because she's in Dubai, also stuck there like thousands of people. And one question is, how do airline companies, are they able to operate, or when will they be able to operate? It's a question by Saiki Machen. But I think it's a good time to also bring in this map.
Okay, let's just bring in Emily Gordine now, who is our journalist there, stuck in Dubai, and that is because of the conflict. Emily, it's great to see you. I know it has been a challenging time for you. Can you just give us a sense of what it is like in Dubai? Because that's certainly a place that wasn't where people have gone there for various reasons to live and to have a new life, certainly not expecting to be caught up in a conflict that seems to be escalating. So what is the mood there at the moment?
Well, the atmosphere in Dubai is increasingly uneasy, I would say. Dubai is a hub for tourism, so I am one of many thousands of tourists who are stranded in Dubai right now. No planes are departing from the United Arab Emirates. Some people have been trying to make their way to Muscat in Oman to leave the region. There are reports about the very wealthy in Dubai who have been able to get a ride over to Riyadh in Saudi Arabia, and then to charter private jets from Saudi Arabia, then from Riyadh abroad. But the vast majority of tourists are essentially stuck here. And the atmosphere is, of course, tense, because you're sitting here, imagine you're sitting at the breakfast table and you can hear loud booms. And I am usually for DW stationed in Jerusalem, and in Israel, if there are rockets, if there are missiles incoming, you get alerts on your phones. There are loud sirens that ring through the country. This is not the case here. So it is a very subtle reminder, really, that Iran is continuing to strike the region, and the main targets here seem to be Dubai and Abu Dhabi. It seems to be varying in terms of who gets hit. But ultimately, what we know so far is that Iran has launched over 160 ballistic missiles at the United Arab Emirates and over 500 drones. The government, the defense ministry, has been able to intercept the majority of them, but some of the debris has caused damage to some of the hotels here, to the Abu Dhabi and Dubai airport, to housing complexes and to other civilian infrastructure. And while the government is, of course, trying to highlight the fact that these interceptions have been very successful and they're doing everything they can to keep their citizens and their visitors safe, of course, people are nervous.
Yes. I mean, it does sound like, from what you're saying, that the United Arab Emirates was not prepared for something like this. Does it feel to you that you are in an area that is affected by war at the moment then? Does it feel that this is, that there's no idea as to how far Iran could go when you talk about ballistic missiles, etc.?
I mean, on the one hand, when I spoke to people who are residents here, who are not tourists here, they did say that they expect Iran to retaliate because on the UAE because it hosts US military bases. But they thought they would be the target and not civilians themselves, because we've seen attacks, especially drone attacks, on civilian infrastructure here. Now, in terms of, do you feel very much? Well, as a tourist, you are mostly confined to your hotel. Dubai hosts beautiful hotels, fantastic hotels, that really are catered to the tourists, to the visitors' comforts. So in terms of your surrounding, you can be very comfortable, but of course, you can hear the explosions in the air. So that's what I meant when I say there is always that gentle reminder, really, that things are not okay. And it's a constant pull and it's sort of a push and pull, really. There are moments where you think you're on holiday because the temperatures are also warm, it's a beautiful place, and at the same time you can hear rocket explosions above the skies of Dubai.
Shani, you wanted to come in there.
Yeah, I just want to say, I mean, what Dubai has to offer, it's a very small kingdom. You know, what they have is their stability, is, you know, Emily's saying, talking about this as a tourism hub, a tech hub, a banking hub, you know, not to mention that the flying, you know, that for itself, you know, with Etihad, with the Emirates, is a giant, you know, government-run airline that is, you know, that's part of what the Gulf was trying to, you know, establish itself as, and especially we've been hearing it since Trump, you know, about, you know, the successful, you know, the non-political almost part of the Arab world, unlike the old, more, you know, we know the troubles in Lebanon and in Syria and all of that. That was supposed to be the new goal for the new Arab model of life and of business and so on. And so seeing them dragged into this war, many of them, you hear some voices, you hear some leading, you know, read some leading op-eds in papers in the Arab world, they feel like they're kind of dragged in to this war that is not theirs, and there, you know, the implications are very, very strong, you know, that they need to face now. But it's also a symbol to the new world we are facing now, where we're in a new era where you have to take sides. Yeah. You had the animality of like a place like Qatar, who managed to be very close with Iran, but hosting also the biggest base, American base in the region at the same time. I'm not sure we can still see it lasting for much longer.
Thank you very much, Shani, for that. Emily, just we need to actually speak to our next guest now, but I wanted to just say, stay safe. Thank you for talking to us. I'm sure we will be speaking to you again later today, because it would be interesting to know if there are plans to get people out of, for example, Dubai. But thank you very much for now. Let me now move on to our next guest. We have got an economist who specialises in energy economics. His name is Christophe Roule, and he is joining us now because we specifically want to talk about what is happening in the Strait of Hormuz, which, of course, as we were talking about earlier, with Shani, our Middle East analyst, and also our Iranian analyst, has been closed by Iran. Around 150 tankers are anchored there and are not allowed to pass. So my first question is, what impact are those stranded ships having on the rest of the world, and particularly on the oil price?
Good morning. So I also live there. I have, opposed to your other guests, I have the reverse problem. I can't go back at the moment in Abu Dhabi. But this region is dependent on oil in more senses than one. But still, the original dependence on oil exports is the most important one. If you now look at the Strait of Hormuz, of all the possible damage this war could do to global oil markets, a sustained blockage of the Strait of Hormuz is probably the biggest risk. because most of the infrastructure which could be damaged could be repaired fairly soon or is diversified. The Strait of Hormuz, about a fifth of global crude oil passes through that. It's actually a little less. Just to give you a sense of the numbers, it's about 19, so just keep in mind the number 19 million barrels per day, which normally pass through that Strait of Hormuz, of which only about 8 or 9 could be redirected through overland pipelines from Saudi Arabia and the UAE without being loaded on ships. The rest would be blocked. And the biggest threat is, of course, that insurers and ship owners just refuse to use the strait, or that the strait becomes mined and ships are blown up and block this very narrow pathway, very, very shallow pathway. At the moment, we have no indications that this has been targeted by any side. It would also block, of course, Iranian exports. So a deliberate attempt to block the Strait of Hormuz for a sustainable period is unlikely at the moment, and you can see that in the price reaction, which prices are up 10%, but not really heavily spiking, because no one really has an interest in it. A scenario which could block the Strait of Hormuz would be either rogue attempts by parts of the Iranian Revolutionary Guards or so to take matters in their own hand and hurt the enemy more than themselves, or a final scenario of a government which believes it can no longer win the war and then blocks the strait. Should the strait be blocked for the long term, the consequences for the global economy could be quite dramatic.
Yes, but you're saying that prices have gone up 10%, but that's not as much as it could have gone up. So do you believe then that the strait will be reopened relatively soon?
At the moment, it is not closed. It is there are contradictory statements by the Iranians, but it's a voluntary decision of ship owners and insurance companies and oil companies to hold back. There are still some individual ships trickling through that, I understand, most of them, interestingly, from Iran, and the others are piling up there. There's also an additional buffer. At the moment, storage facilities among the Middle Eastern oil producers are still pretty much available, empty. So I mentioned this number 19 million barrels per day passing through the strait. We have storage capacity of about 350 million barrels. That means that oil production in the region could continue for about a month, and the oil could be put in storage, and we would have shortages in the rest of the world, but no permanent outage. So it could then be, whenever there's peace returns, could be used again.
Yes.
So to answer your question.
Yes, please. Sorry, answer my question. I just wanted to say, of course, we do know that at least one ship, if not two, have already been attacked in that strait. I think we have some pictures of that. So it is obviously a very live and real issue for tankers that are in that area. But yes, please do continue.
No, absolutely. That's one of the key risks I'm seeing, that rogue elements or independent, splinter groups of the army or the Revolutionary Guards attack ships because it's such an easy target. The strait is very small, very shallow. A few ships sank there could actually block it. And of course, the threat is a psychological one. Nobody will send his ships through there if there's this risk, which clearly exists at the moment, and that explains these 150 ships which are sitting there waiting. What I was trying to say is that there's a difference between a temporary blockage, which would lead to price spikes, which could easily go in the region of 100, and a permanent disruption, which would require that not only the strait is blocked, but also production is affected in the region somewhere. And this will only be the case after storage has been filled up. And that, in turn, would take about three to 4 weeks, which we could bypass the situation with higher prices, but without physical disruptions. Because when we look at the disruption this can cause to oil markets, we have to look at both sides of the coin. One is price spikes because of the fact that oil gets scarcer and people are worried about disruptions. And the other one is real physical disruptions, as in no car being driven anymore. And that, of course, would be the thing which would cause the biggest economic damage.
Absolutely. Higher fuel prices for consumers worldwide would certainly make people sit up and notice what is happening. Sheni, you wanted to ask a...
Yeah, if I don't mind chipping in, I've been hearing in the last day many people wondering about Saudi Arabia and their moves or lack of moves when it comes to oil production. Is there any way for them to ramp up oil production in order to divert any of the Iranian disturbances and ensure stabilizing oil prices by enlarged production from their side?
Well, we have to see the background is indeed an interesting one. By purpose or by accident or not, we are having a period in which oil supplies are larger than oil demand. So there's huge excess supply on the markets coming from oil being discovered in different parts of the world. OPEC, the Middle Eastern producers ramping up their production before all of that happened. So the markets are very well supplied. And that is the reason why we have seen oil prices going up to 80 and not higher. Now, having said that, the spare capacity which is now available globally is concentrated heavily in the Gulf and exactly that region which we are talking about. And within the Gulf Cooperation Council, it's very heavily concentrated in Saudi Arabia. That spare capacity is not very high. It's about 3 to 3.5 million barrels per day in a market which globally is now above 100 million barrels per day. So you could say 3%. And usually at least 2.5 million barrels per day are always kept there for real emergencies. So a blockage of the Strait of Hormuz, even if the pipelines were all functional, it would only affect, say, 8 or 9 million barrels per day, could not be compensated by increased production from Saudi Arabia. Not even to mention that, of course, couldn't be shipped out, because in a situation like that, the straits would be blocked. So the situation is, in that sense, a situation where we could see any kind of activity blocking the strait would immediately have at least a price spike as a result, and over time then physical disruptions as well.
And you did talk there before when you said actually that strait is not actually blocked. It's and that there has been some mixed messages about that. But we obviously have got this prolonged disruption. What about the fact that many insurers will not insure ships in that area, meaning that it is effectively blocked? How long do you think they will hold out on that? And if they do for some time, is there an alternative route that not just Iran, but the other countries affected, such as Saudi Arabia, can use?
So this is precisely the point, because for all intents and purposes, whether the strait is blocked by some official announcement of one of the warring parties, or whether it is blocked because insurers and owners of ships say, no, not with my ship, and don't use it anymore, that comes to the same thing. And in a very real sense, the uncertainty and the expectations that something may happen, and these little incidents here and there of ships being attacked here and there, and nobody knows exactly how much of that is a rogue group and how much of that is part of a master plan. This uncertainty feeds, of course, exactly into the same results of ships not going, and an end of the situation not in sight, different from an official government announcement where, you know, if government disappears, the announcement is dead. With this kind of rogue activity, have no end in sight. And that's the real threat, and that's what we are seeing at the moment. To the second part of your question, Saudi Arabia has another pipeline out, so it has a so-called Northeast pipeline, which can transport somewhere around 5 to 6 million barrels of oil through the Straits of Hormuz, passing, as I said before, 19 million barrels per day. There are some other smaller pipelines. Round about half of what is going through the straits could be redirected overland. But that half is still, the other half, which would be locked down and could not be transported out, is still would still by far be the largest disruption in oil markets which we had for a very, very long time. It would by far be enough to lead to a sustained price spike and potentially to physical disruptions as well. So we are still talking about, in an oil market of 100 odd barrels, we were still talking about, say, 9 to 10 million barrels, which could not be redirected and which would be effectively gone from this market. And that would be prices, depends how long it takes, prices over 100, and then physical disruptions as well.
Christopher Rule, thank you so much for joining us. Very interesting to talk about and how that is impacting not just the region, but potentially also the rest of the world. Let me just bring you up to date with what we are talking about, the latest key events in this widening regional conflict because of Israel and the United States attacking Iran and Iran, of course, retaliating. Hundreds of people are dead and the large majority of casualties have been from US and Israeli strikes on Iran, with several reported killed in countries targeted by Iran in those retaliatory strikes. Following the killing of Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Khamenei, Iran-backed group Hezbollah has launched attacks on Israel. Israel has retaliated with strikes on southern Lebanon and announced a, quote, offensive campaign against Hezbollah. Saudi Arabia, meanwhile, has shut down a state-owned oil refinery after it was struck in an Iranian drone attack. Oil prices have spiked, as we have just been hearing, and tankers have dropped anchor in the Strait of Hormuz, which is in range of Iranian attacks. Officials in Tehran have rejected talks with the United States after a White House source indicated that Trump would be open to talking with Iran's new leadership. And Kuwait's defense ministry has said several US warplanes have crashed in the country, but they have not identified the cause for those crashes, but said that the crews were in stable condition in hospital. And two more lines that are just coming in as we are bringing you this live stream. Loud explosions have been heard in Tehran, the capital of Iran, and the Israel army says it has begun a new broad strike in the heart of Tehran. So those are the latest on that. Let's just now go to our correspondent who is in Jerusalem. That is Tanya Kramer. We were hoping to speak to her a little bit earlier, but she had to take cover because of sirens that were going off. Tanya, great to see you. Great to see that you are safe as well. Can you just give us an idea of what the very latest is from Jerusalem, given what we are now hearing about more attacks, of course, in Tehran, but also Israel itself has come under fire over the past couple of days?
Yeah, that's what we just heard as well from the Israeli military announcing that they're continuing basically striking really deep inside Iran, especially in Tehran. And also what we're hearing in Lebanon, especially southern Lebanon, in this case. What we've been hearing here in the morning, you know, from the early morning, there have been again alerts and alarms for people to take shelter just a short while ago. But is not in the high frequency as we've seen over the past 2 days. However, you know, it does disrupt life here for people because you never quite know when the alarm is coming. And people know as well, you know, what damage those missiles do that actually manage to get through, and those which are not intercepted. We saw that in Beit Shemesh, a city close to Jerusalem, yesterday, where at least 9 people were killed and many were injured from a direct hit. And you know, the whole area there, we went there to see it, was, you know, quite devastated, you know, obliterated, the houses there. So you see how heavy those missiles are. So what people are here, you know, seeing as well is that the Israeli government had said for now they're not changing the guidelines for them. So schools remain closed. Also, the only essential workplaces are allowed to operate at the moment. So it's a pretty, you know, although people know how it is during a war, but it still feels there's a lot of uncertainty what is there to come right now in the next few days.
And we had heard a little bit earlier, Tanya, that the office of the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, had been attacked, I think it was. Do we know anything more about that? Because we were trying to confirm whether that was actually the case.
We don't have much more details on that yet, and I'm sure as soon as we will have this, we will get that to you as well.
Okay, and with this ongoing escalation also in Lebanon, so on the northern front with Lebanon as well, do you think that any real hope for a ceasefire is at all possible, given that it just seems to be escalating so much, even as we speak?
Well, both sides had agreed on a ceasefire last year, but, we are in a different phase now. And some military officials spoke to the media earlier, basically saying it is now Hezbollah who has, from their point of view, decided to join the war and to support its sponsor, Iran. So this is the view from Israel. Of course, both sides, or at least the Lebanese government, Hezbollah, Israel on the other side, have accused each other of violating the ceasefire agreement in recent months. And Israel has, extensively carried out airstrikes as well in southern Lebanon and other parts before this war. But what we are seeing right now is basically that Israel is saying that Hezbollah, by attacking last night around 1 a.m. in the morning, has violated this ceasefire, that Israel is now, carrying out all these airstrikes. And a spokesperson had given out a statement, an order basically this morning to Lebanese citizens in 53 villages to evacuate from there and to get to safety. So it is not quite clear where it's going from there. There were also some questions asked about whether, there could be maybe a ground invasion as well in the cards. So this is still very much unclear. We know that some troops are still on the other side of the border as part of this ceasefire agreement. So what we know for now, Israel has reinforced its side of the border. It also wants to avoid basically that people are living in the north. Israelis will have to evacuate again. That happened after October 7. And Hezbollah also then joined in and launched rockets at Israel. So, at the moment, what we are hearing from the military, they're striking again in the heart of Iran, in Tehran, and also in Lebanon.
Tanya, hi, this is Beenish here. I want to ask you, what's the mood in the country right now? Are people supporting these attacks on Iran, despite the fact that Iran is also now attacking Israel?
Well, I think, there have been some polls leading up to this escalation and to the joint US-Israeli attack on Iran, and people were quite supportive on that. But having said that, you have a variety of opinions here as well in Israel. And there are also people who've told me they're not agreeing with this. They don't want to go from one war to the next. But in general, Iran has been seen as a threat to Israel, and that has been also at the core of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's, politics in recent years. I mean, he has always warned about the threat from Iran, so you have both. But I think people are now, in times of war, people are usually standing together. It's not that they have much choice as well. But, there is a support saying, this needs to come to an end, this threat. But certainly, you have also other opinions here in the country on that.
Tanya Kramer, thank you so much for joining us from Jerusalem. Stay safe, and we will be speaking to you again, obviously, in the coming days. So thank you very much for joining us. Let's go straight now to our correspondent who's actually in Beirut, in Lebanon. That's Stella Mina. It's great to have you with us, because I know you too have been caught up in what's been going on. Obviously, just to lay it out, the Iran-backed militant group Hezbollah launched missiles and drones towards Israel after the killing of Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei. And in response, Israel launched heavy airstrikes on southern Lebanon, killing dozens and wounding over 100 people. What more can you tell us about what the thinking is in Beirut itself, that yet again it is caught up in this conflict, again with Israel?
Well, the situation here in Beirut is still very, very tense. I'm standing here on the streets. People woke up last night around 2:30 o'clock in the morning to the heavy bombardment by Israel. And many, many people fled their homes, especially from Dahi, from the southern suburbs of Beirut that were heavily hit. I'm standing here at Marta Square, which is a very central place in Beirut during the last war in 2024. People gathered here, tried to take some shelter, and this is what is happening now again. There are not as many people as there used to be in 2024, but already people are here setting up their tents, just sitting on the streets, and generally, people are very stressed and worried because they're just fed up with Hezbollah. So many people said, why again? And is Hezbollah dragging us into a war? And people are really trying to find safe places now, because here in Lebanon, we don't have any sirens warning us, and people also don't have any shelters. So many people who live in the southern suburbs of Beirut are just now forced to stay on the roads, on the streets.
It sounds a very frightening situation. Has there been any reaction from the Lebanese government itself?
Yes, indeed. We have several statements from Lebanese politicians earlier this morning who are condemning these attacks of Hezbollah, calling them very unnecessary. There has also been an emergency meeting by the new Lebanese government. We have to remember this Lebanese government came into position after the last war, after Hezbollah was so weakened that it was impossible to form a government. The government has now met in this emergency meeting, and we have just heard some statements by Prime Minister Salam, who said that the government has decided to ban Hezbollah's military actions and that they are calling on the peace mechanism that is already present in the south. They should prevent further strikes carried out by Hezbollah. Of course, now the question is whether these statements actually can prevent Hezbollah from acting, because just banning them and banning their military actions won't necessarily prevent them if they want to strike again. But what we do see is that the Lebanese government is trying to get control over the situation, is trying to really try and be a state, be present, and try to get hand and control over the things that are going on in the country.
Thank you very much. Yes, Shani, you had a...
Stella, I want to quickly ask you, we're talking a lot about Hezbollah. Of course, they were, for many years, the dominant Shiite voice in Lebanon, but they are not the only one. There's also the Amal movement. There are other Shiites in Lebanon. Where do they stand on this? Because I can imagine how many of them also personally have been affected by that, or have certain emotions when it comes to the death of Khamenei. Have you been hearing in Lebanon? Is it something that is there in the mood? A bigger, maybe, Shia rift or different voices within the Shia movement?
Of course, there are different voices and different opinions here in Lebanon. Lebanon is a very highly divided country with many different sects, and people, of course, have different opinion when it comes to the death of the Iranian leader. Within the Shia community in Lebanon, of course, there is a bit of sadness, and there are some people who are mourning his death. Yesterday, there was a gathering taking place in Dahiya to mourn Khamenei. I was present there. I was watching the people, and there were a couple of hundred people who gathered there who were mourning. For them, Khamenei was a political leader, and they also put up pictures not only of him but also of Hassan Nasrallah. So you can still feel that within the Shia community and among Hezbollah supporters, there are, of course, some people who feel sadness and for the loss, and who are now also worried that their organization, Hezbollah, might not strike as much as they want Hezbollah to strike.
Salamina, thank you so much for joining us from Beirut. Very interesting, bringing us up to date. Also that the Lebanese government is demanding that Hezbollah, the militant group, hand over its weapons. That's what the Prime Minister has been saying. Thank you very much. Again, please do stay safe, and we will be speaking to you over the next few days. One other thing just to add is that the Kuwaiti air defences says or the US military has said that Kuwaiti air defences mistakenly shot down 3 US F-15 fighter jets flying in Iran-related operations. All 6 aircrew ejected safely and have been safely recovered. We have some pictures now of that. All 6 aircrew are said to be in a stable condition. That is what the US military has said regarding what it says were Kuwaiti air defences mistakenly shooting down 3 US F-15 fighter jets flying in Iran-related operations.
Alex, this is just to show you a bit of the chaos and the confusion we are seeing. I mean, tight communication and collaboration, it's a key. You know, when you have so many countries operating on the ground, these are countries, I mean, Kuwait, for example, you know, they are allies of the U.S. in the sense that bases are stationed there, but they don't have much on the ground, you know, a de facto and necessarily recent experience with operating together. And this is just another example of that. I just want to, if we can just go back quickly to Lebanon and Hezbollah as a meaning for Iran that is more than just symbolic. You know, first of all, it was supposed to be the first line of defense for Iran. It was propped up for decades with billions and billions of dollars funneled there in order to be the first, basically, line of response for the Iranians. Because when missiles come from Lebanon, it's a much shorter range. It gives the Israelis far less time to prepare. Many of the Israeli defense systems are far the short range and the kind of missiles that you can shoot from Lebanon, unlike what you do from Iran. And the fact that, you know, it has collapsed. I mean, the ceasefire started in November 24, that was shortly after and Stella was just mentioning Hassan Nasrallah, the legendary head of Hezbollah, was also assassinated by an Israeli attack in his bunker. Just to show you, you know, Hezbollah is fighting and struggling to survive and recover ever since. But the policy of the proxies, of the circle of fire that Iran sort of called, was trying to build against, you know, around Israel as its main pillar of defense, that for itself was something they were still holding on to. American intelligence reports are claiming that in the last year, despite everything we've seen going on in Iran, despite the fact they could not even secure, you know, enough water to the citizens of the capital, Tehran, they still funneled about $1 billion into Hezbollah, trying to prompt it up. So this is a very important thing, and it was clear. That once something happens, they were indicating that, you know, once something happens to Khamenei, they will have to operate. And Israel is actually seizing that moment. Israel almost was looking for that excuse to finally eradicate, you know, or you know, erode further the already weak Hezbollah, to try and get that threat out of the way. And in many ways, when you hear what's happening in Israel and the way they're talking about the attack on Lebanon and Hezbollah, they frame it very much like they frame the attack on Iran. We are almost giving a gift to the to the Lebanese. You know, the Israelis say we are giving a gift to the Lebanese government, who was not capable of getting Hezbollah to disarm, who was not able to move on and recover. And this is partially why you know, there's a lot of consensus in that in Israel and with the Americans. Maybe this is also an opportunity for the Lebanese people to finally get rid of Hezbollah, who's been, as many, you know, as Stella also was saying herself, as many as Lebanon has been seeing, dragging Lebanon down with repeated, repeated attacks on Israel that had, that had weakened Lebanon due to Israeli strikes, very severe strikes, we have to say, on Lebanon for many years.
Yep, very interesting points there.
Yeah, quickly. So what about Houthis? Because what I've been reading is that Houthi still can cause a lot of trouble.
Correct, and we're actually almost
And let's just explain that the Houthis, of course, are in Yemen, which is also in the region, and they were causing certainly a lot of trouble in the area, in the strait going towards the Suez Canal.
Bab el-Mandab, yeah, this is the strait on the reaching, to the into the Red Sea and the Suez Canal, which is also another very important shipping route. Yeah, we've seen them, the Houthis, a Yemenite Shiite militia connected to Iran. They have been fighting against vessels in the Red Sea, but also against Israel. Soon after October, they recently stopped a couple of months ago after a ceasefire was reached between, in Gaza. But now they have said that they're going to resume their attacks, but we've actually seen them far less effective than expected. Israel is still on high alert. You talk about Israelis in general. Israel has had more than 100,000 reserve soldiers that have been called for duty in the last days. They're stretched. We need to also keep that in mind when we're talking about playing for time and how long this can last. The Israeli military is exhausted after 2.5 years of constant fighting in so many different fronts. And now they need to stretch in the south, waiting for the Houthis, in the north, due to Hezbollah, and of course, along the West Bank and Gaza. These are still open fronts that Israel is facing.
Did you have any more comments that have come in the chat?
There are actually two questions on the role of UN. So Domino Man 86 is asking, UN ain't doing anything. And then we have another question, is there any move from the UN to resolve this conflict so far?
Well, yesterday there was an emergency gathering of the UN Security Council, just to show you, there was a lot of banter between Israel and the US and the Iranian representatives. But in a way, the UN was doing what it's always doing, which is very little and the maximum they can do. This is where it is when we talk about the UN. Waltz, the ambassador, the American ambassador to the UN, was saying there, basically this was not an attack. It was a preemptive effort in order to strengthen the region and to protect the region, trying to sell that to the world, and basically saying peace is built on strength and not on appeasement. But not just the UN is missing from the picture. We are sitting here in Germany. Europe is almost mute completely as we are seeing this conflict unfolding. It's slightly different for the British case.
Yeah, I was going to say, because they've now said that the US can use their air bases, hence the issues going on in Cyprus.
And we are actually getting a report just recently coming in about a drone attack on Paphos, on the
two unmanned drones heading towards the UK's base in Cyprus, but they said that they were intercepted. That's what the Cyprus government had said.
So that puts the UK in a harsher dilemma. We've also seen Macron earlier today basically being very vocally frustrated for this escalating this far, claiming there could have and should have been a diplomatic solution to that. But this is the world we're in. Donald Trump is calling the shot, and everybody is falling in line, even within the Arab world, as much as there's a lot of fear, a lot of confusion, a lot of frustration also. I've been hearing some reports from the Saudis talking about how the Americans have made sure to protect Israel, preparing for this operation, and as it is ongoing, but there's not enough effort made to protect the other allies in the region. So nonetheless, the Americans are calling the shot, and we're seeing the rest of the world just very limited in what it can do.
And let's just talk about the rest of the world, because, Binish, I did want to very briefly talk to you about the situation in South Asia, because that has not been immune to what's going on with this Iran war now, and particularly the country of Pakistan, where we have seen people protesting, and there were also deaths, weren't there, yesterday on Sunday?
So, Alex, Pakistan is an interesting case. Outside of Iran, I think the most Shias that live anywhere in any country is Pakistan. So it has one of the highest Shia populations in the world. So it's a very sensitive issue. And Shia Muslims in Pakistan generally have a very close cultural and also religious, they have very close ties with the Iranian regime, with the Iranian people. And therefore, when there was news that there has been an attack by the US and Israel on Iran, people were angry, and it's not only Shia people. Generally in Pakistan, most people are against any US intervention in the region. But we saw that the Shia Muslims were triggered. They were very, very angry. There were protests in different parts of Pakistan. And one was very deadly in Karachi, where thousands of people took to the streets, and hundreds of them protesters. We can also see those pictures. They tried to attack the U.S. consulate in Karachi, and there were clashes and 9 people were killed, but then there were clashes also in other parts of Pakistan and Gilgit-Baltistan. Also, thousands of people wanted to reach the U.S. embassy in Islamabad. So there's a lot of anger in Pakistan, and Pakistan has been trying to play or react diplomatically to this region. For example, they have called the killing of Ayatollah Khamenei a martyrdom because they want to be sensitive to the Shia Muslims in Pakistan.
But that's difficult for them, though, isn't it? Because they've also been trying to hedge their bets very much with Donald Trump.
Yes, Pakistan is also a member of the Board of Peace. And in this specific case, Pakistan has condemned the US and Israeli strikes, but at the same time, it has condemned the Iranian attacks on Gulf countries. Pakistan has very close ties with the Gulf countries, especially Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia and Pakistan have signed a defense pact last year. And then also Qatar, also millions of Pakistanis work in the Middle East, in the Gulf countries. So stakes are extremely high for Pakistan. And if something happens in Iran, if there is instability in Iran, it directly impacts Pakistan. Pakistan has a very restive province of Balochistan that borders Iran. And there are real fears and concerns in Pakistan that if there is instability in Iran, then militants from Iran can cross border into Pakistan. Balochistan province, Balochistan is already a hotbed of separatist militant groups, and those militant groups could be further emboldened. So Pakistan is very, very cautiously looking at this conflict. It does not want, it has also expressed solidarity with Iran. So it's trying to diplomatically satisfy everyone. The Prime Minister of Pakistan has called the leaders of Bahrain, of Qatar, of Saudi Arabia. So they want to make sure that they are not put in a position where they have to pick one side.
And while we're just talking about Pakistan, Pakistan's neighbour, I don't mean the issues with Afghanistan, but of course India. India also has many, many workers in the Gulf, in Gulf countries. How are they playing it?
India is a bit different because India, first of all, Pakistan does not even recognize the state of Israel. Pakistan has no diplomatic relations with Israel, but India has been developing relations with Israel. Just 2 days, I think, before these attacks. Last week, Indian Prime Minister was in Israel. He addressed the Knesset and he expressed his full solidarity and said that India is with Israel with full conviction. And then just 2 days after this attack happened, and very interestingly, the Indian Prime Minister has not said anything on the killing of Ayatollah Khamenei, and India has reasonable ties with Iran. So, and the only 2 leaders he has spoken with is the Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu and to the Prime Minister of UAE. And to the leader of the UAE, the Israeli Narendra Modi has actually condemned the strikes in UAE. So it seems that India is maybe trying to get more close into the camp of the US and Israel and slightly moving away from Iran.
Thank you very much. Very, very interesting there, and amazing how this is impacting the wider region as well. Let me just recap for those of you who have been with us and or those of you who are joining us. We are looking at the latest key events in this widening regional conflict. It has already left hundreds of people dead, and the large majority of casualties have been from US and Israeli strikes on Iran, with several reported killed in countries targeted by Iran for retaliatory strikes. Following the killing of Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, Iran-backed group Hezbollah launched attacks on Israel. And that, of course, was from Lebanon. Israel retaliated with strikes on southern Lebanon and announced a, quote, offensive campaign against Hezbollah. Saudi Arabia, as we heard before, has shut down a state-owned oil refinery after it was struck in an Iranian drone attack. Oil prices have gone up. We were hearing earlier by about 10% as hundreds of tankers have dropped anchor in the Strait of Hormuz, which is in range of Iranian attacks. Officials in Tehran have rejected talks with the US after a White House source indicated that Trump would be open to talking with Iran's new leadership. And just on that, the very latest we are getting in is that Israeli fighter jets have launched new strikes on targets in Iran. That happened around midday on Monday, the military said. The latest wave of attacks targeted security facilities in the heart of Tehran, it added there.
Alex, but just I want to make a correction. Narendra Modi spoke with the president of UAE, not the prime minister.
OK, thank you. But just with that ongoing situation and with Israel now saying that it's launched new strikes on targets, and then just before we were talking about the possibility of talks between them. I mean, they were having talks before Israel and the United States decided to attack Iran. Where are we with talks? Is it dead and buried, or is there the possibility that diplomacy could come to the fore again?
That's a very good question. It's hard to predict. Trump says he's open to it. Ali Larijani, who was one of Khamenei's top leaders, top advisors. He's also the head of the National Security Council in Iran. Basically, de facto, probably the most meaningful leader today in Iran, definitely when it comes to defense and strategy. He was completely unequivocally against it, saying we will not surrender, we will not talk to the US. But let's also be honest, what are we expecting these talks to do? Because Iran will double down on its, we've heard it so far saying they're not going to give up on enrichment, they're not going to give up on their ability to have their own nuclear weapon. And what they have been seeing in the last days, for them, it's just a proof that reassures their feeling that this is the only way for them to secure their existence. They feel like, the more they're pushed, the more they're being attacked, the more they're convinced that the only way for them to sustain longer in, their existence is through pursuing nuclear capabilities. So in that way, as long as the U.S. has a very clear line, we're not going to let it happen. Of course, for Israel, it's also a clear direction. It's going to be very hard to find any concession between these two. When we mentioned the nuclear, I want to mention something quite interesting. We had an announcement by the IAEA, the International Committee for it's always a long name. I always get confused about atomic energy. Basically saying they have no indication of any Iranian nuclear facilities being hit. Just to show where we are in this attack after 3 days of attack. And just also to show you how well prepared the Iranians were with protecting the crown jewel. This is the most important thing for the Iranians. They're not going to let it be vulnerable so easily for Israeli or an American attack. So, again, we will need to find a ramp off. There will need to be some sort of a solution coming out. And I think Trump, from the get-go, was preparing his way out when he says, I'm going to, pass on the baton to the Iranian people themselves. So for Trump, at any moment, he can say, OK, we've done what we can. Now it's in your hands, because he had given it a very limited, easy way to sort of call it off at any minute.
Yeah. And Shani, just quickly, but Iran has refused to negotiate right now, right?
Well, officially, this is what we're hearing. They're not interested in that. And again, let's be realistic at what could be the goals of such an agreement, if ever achieved. The way Israel sees it, the very idea of talking to Iran legitimizes them, and of course now after Trump has built the case about Iran being such a oppressive regime of evil and cruelness, it's going to be very hard for him to try and sort of say, OK, but now let's talk. It could work if we are seeing, because Trump was also throwing all sorts of hints in the last days that we know who could take over. We have been in touch with some people. Sort of maybe they are waiting to place a pragmatic leader, sort of like a Venezuela scenario where they have their own people that they've been in touch with. They will take the seat, will take the lead in Iran, and then maybe that could be a good way for them to sort of get some sort of agreement with Iran and some sort of compromise.
Shani, thank you so much. Thank you for being with us for this very long live stream. It's been fascinating. Thank you to Beinish as well, and a big thank you to all of you who are with us in the chat, also our viewers who sent in your questions. Thank you for your active participation. attention and for making this a genuine dialogue and understanding. We will have another live stream coming up in the next hour or so, because this is a breaking news story. So, of course, we need to know what is happening next with this Iran war. We will be back, I am told, in 1 hour. Thank you very much, and we will see you soon.